Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time Studios on a beautiful August 9th, 2022. I am joined transatlantically over the interwebs by Greg Chu, the founder and co-founder and CEO of QPQ. He's joining us from Zug, Switzerland. Greg, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Chris, thank you for having me. Pleasure.
So we will dive right in. My audience is going to be grippingly enlightened by our chatter. Maybe give us a quick background about kind of how you got to where you are, what you've done before in your career, and how that led you to QPQ.
Okay, so I started this back in the early 2000s. Back then, I may as well have been trying to tell people I was going to land a rocket upside down on Pluto, but
which is a planet, by the way. On this show, Pluto's a planet. But go on.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that it wasn't a planet.
A controversy for another time.
Yeah, this is one of those many discussions I have with my children where they come back from school talking complete rubbish, and I have to educate them again properly. Anyway, boldness aside. So look, I was trading different commodity instruments and different asset instruments for a multifamily fund. I didn't understand why I had to have different computers to access different markets. I thought it was stupid. So I began to look at how we could network all the pieces. Long story short, I discovered that the banking system is a Frankensteinian mess, that really it actually is, it does what, the fact that it does anything at all is borderline miracle. And that's not down to the systems, it's despite the systems. It's because of all the tens of thousands of people who populate the back and middle offices and make this morass operate at some level.
Right.
And so the first part was I no matter what I did, I was a hostage to this same system, the same as everyone else is today. And the second part to it was I realized that no matter how much regulation I did or went through anything else, I couldn't address the fact that fundamentally I was re-centralizing everything to myself, and this just wasn't acceptable. If you look at the big projects that have succeeded in financial services, they're the likes of Visa, MasterCard, Swift. They had hundreds of members to begin with, and they've expanded to tens of thousands today. Okay, so they're not really decentralized, but the ownership is. And this is how, when I was looking at this as a problem set, I understood computing consensus, but I also know that computing consensus isn't really an answer to the question. It's not Byzantine, fault tolerant or anything like that. And so I went off building farming and mining cooperatives because I believe that capitalism is the answer to every problem. And capitalism is not I win, you lose. It's I win, you win, we win, right?
Yeah, we all grow a much bigger pie. We're happy with tinier slices
100%.
of that pie. Yep.
Exactly.
Turning luxuries into commonalities.
Right. And capitalism is not a short-term playbook either. It's long-term. It's saying I can make more money making 6% every year for 100 years than I can making 30% for 5.
Right.
Anyway, look, I digress. That's a whole other topic. But
it's an important driver. I mean, all that sort of framework drives the rationale for why we construct the things we do and we pursue the investments we pursue. Because there is an overarching framework to it. It's not just greed, which is how some would characterize it.
Correct. And I think for me, this was always almost a calling. I mean, I'm sounding very much like the Catholic school board that I am when I say that. But my grandfather was account number 2. The parish priest was account number 1 for the credit union in Ireland. And that actually transformed access to finance in rural Ireland. Tens of thousands of people came to my grandfather's funeral and talked about how he had changed their lives. So, look, I grew up with the understanding that one person can actually change things. And if you believe in something and you follow it through and you adhere to it, the right pieces of the puzzle will unlock to allow it to happen. But look, again, that's a whole other topic. The point for me was this. When I began to understand what was going on with DLT, the start for me was Bitcoin. I didn't get into it because I'm a little bit autistic. To me, either something is right or wrong, Or if it's gray, it's because I haven't got enough information to make a decision.
Black
But
or
once
white.
I have enough information to make a decision, it's black or white.
And just to make sure that everyone, just really quickly, because I have a fairly generalist audience that are interested, DLT is distributed ledger technology. What other people refer to locally as blockchain.
Yeah. So yeah, blockchain is like saying Betamax or Hoover rather than vacuum cleaner, right?
It's a variant on distributed ledger technology.
Precisely.
Right.
So Bitcoin came along for me 2011. I was a bit late to the party, but I looked at it and said, okay, so we were testing 400,000 transactions per second in 2004, and I considered that to be a good start and no more. 5 transactions per second, irrelevant.
Right.
Now, did it do something else? Yes, it awakened a consciousness about how we can create a new type of market, a new type of economy that is distributed. And this was interesting. So Ethereum, I learned about 2014. Again, I looked at it and the little autism in me said, it won't scale. Therefore, I can't sit here and say, hey, I'm a crypto billionaire because I knew about this stuff back then and I bought it. I didn't. The little sad autistic in me said, no, this is the wrong answer, therefore you will not buy it. But anyway.
Fair enough. The only smart thing Keynes ever said was, I don't have to know about something. I just need to know what the mass of men will think about it.
Yeah, there you go. And really, as a former trader, I should have taken that sentiment aspect into it and done that. But to me, it was just much more, I arrived at a point of information where I had a sufficiency of information to say yes or no, and the answer was no, therefore the no applied to everything. DAGs, on the other hand, changed my thinking. Directed acyclic graphs. Now, this is a form of distributed ledger technology. Let's unpack that term.
Yeah.
So a distributed ledger, if we had one other person on this call, we could be a distributed ledger. Okay, each of us gets a notepad out and goes, okay, the book just to Chris's left, the one with the brown title block at the top, that's this, and we all write it down. Okay, right. The consensus is somebody going around checking your notes, my notes, and the third person's notes, and says, yes, I have consensus. 3 out of 3 have said this occurred. The technology is there to give us that capacity to get consensus really quickly and at scale. Now, that's actually what's failed. The technology has failed. We have failed to find a way of delivering that consensus in a properly decentralized manner. And that's where we begin to let the whole thing slip away. So when you look at a directed acyclic graph, what it does is allows you to make assumptions. And I'm being very simplistic here for the technical people in your audience. They will find this annoying, but it allows you to make assumptions about consensus through the system and thereby allows you to speed the whole process up and get the confirmations through. So that set me to think, okay, the means to answer the 2 problems that I had in 2008, 2009 that led to me shelving everything I'd done then, I can now address because I can build a system that departs from the existing financial system and builds a completely new fabric. 1. 2, I don't own it. Everybody owns it. And if everybody owns it, then actually why there is no centralization. There is no fear that Greg will run off with the money and spend the rest of his days sitting on an island in the Caribbean. So that was when I said about rebuilding QPQ. And in the end, we went way beyond where we started. We did that because actually the technology component in distributed ledgers just didn't make the leaps that we thought it would. And ultimately...
Let me back up a quick second to make that connection deliberately from how does the distributed acyclic graph technology solve the problem that you were seeing?
It's scale. So you've got the likes of Hedera, Algorand talking about being able to operate at hundreds of thousands, if not millions of transactions per second. Now, those figures aren't actually true. They're good marketing, but they're not true.
Right.
They are more of an aspirational state, not quite as much as of an aspirational state as when Ethereum says it'll do 100,000 transactions per second when it moves to proof of stake. That's more like an aspirational state, like when I say I go to the newsagent at the corner shop and I buy a lottery ticket. That's an aspirational state.
Right. With about the same odds.
Yeah, exactly the same. So
it's like everyone says. I know a lot of people who are in the fitness industry, and every year on January 2nd, when the gyms reopen, is the biggest spike in new memberships that they see. Every fat alcoholic who woke up on the morning of the first going, I gotta get my life together. And they go and they buy a gym membership, and then they never show up again.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, so it's I think when you look at directed acyclic graphs like Algorand, Hedera, they've really tried to solve that speed of consensus and throughput of consensus. But even when you do that, you run into something, and some of your listeners may recall Libra. And I'm going to get a little bit geeky here, but I'll try and keep it in
Geek out. They love that.
Terms.
They can gloss over it. They can rewind and hear it again, take notes.
Sure. So directed acyclic graphs also have limitations. Okay, and it's not the case that if you keep adding more capacity that actually you get more throughput and more speed. In fact, the two are opposing one another. The faster you go, the more throughput you have, the slower you go. And maybe that bit's obvious. It's a little bit like how much water can you push through a hose pipe, right? You can increase the pressure to a point, but then the hose pipe breaks.
Right.
And again, I know I'm being simplistic, but here's what happened with Libra. Libra stopped at a specific number of nodes, 52, and most people didn't understand why. The why is actually very straightforward, because there's a logarithmic fall off in the speed between getting consensus and throughput for each node you add after 52, given the way that the Libra directed acyclic graph was structured. Now, you could structure it slightly differently and get to a different number, but ultimately, any directed acyclic graph runs into exactly the same issue, where the number of nodes can increase, but the speed of consensus falls away. So they got to a point where they said, well, when you tap your Visa card, it takes about 7 seconds for the whole cycle of transaction and confirmation to happen. And they wanted Libra to mimic our experience, the user experience of using credit cards. So they picked 7 seconds as the consensus time, but that limited them to 320,000 transactions per second. So,
and is that limitation the way I'm just curious, that limitation, the way that's structured, is that because the number of transactions that can be done is a combinatorial problem, the way they've structured the algorithm, or is it a different issue that leads to that bottlenecking?
It's a melange of them. So you will end up with slightly different slightly different numbers of nodes with slightly different constructions of how you reach consensus in any given variation of how you deliver a DAG. However, they all have the same problem. And the way you overcome that is through sharding. Sharding is where you say, okay, well, we can do 300,000 transactions in this box and 300,000 in this box. So how about we have 1,000 boxes? Great.
Right.
So now you've got massive throughput, but then you have the problem of how do you relate that back to having a single truth?
Yeah, how do you do reconciliation if you got, say, 550 of those 1,000 threads choose answer A and 450 choose answer B, but the consensus on the 450 was 98% valid, and the consensus on the A was 51% valid, which is the valid answer. Is that part of the problem?
Sure. So, in the long term, we have an answer to that particular issue, but that's not where we start. The story really, I was looking at this from a completely different perspective. As far as I was concerned, all of those questions were being solved by somebody else. It was only really in two and a half years in that I realized that they actually weren't being solved, that the game wasn't moving ahead. But I'll come back to that. What I focused on was tokens aren't assets. You can call them, you can construct them in lots of different ways to have relationships with assets, but fundamentally they point at assets. They're not assets in of themselves.
Yeah, it's just a recording mechanism.
Sure. So I can have a token of my car. I can have a token of my house. It doesn't mean that I actually have real ownership conveyed in the form of the token. Now, between two consenting adults, we can transfer that token, and I can say, yeah, I'll give you my house, Chris. If you've got the token, you've paid me for my token, I'll transfer the house to you. But you're still in a state of trust. And the thing that distributed ledger technology, or distributed ledgers do, really, the technology just speeds the process up. The thing they really do is they allow us to trust the message, not the messenger. And fundamentally, that's the bottom line rule. And anything that brings us back to trusting the messenger again breaks the rules.
Right.
It's a bit like today, I put a post out on LinkedIn, and I called out the layer twos. So layer twos are allegedly blockchain solutions that allow us to overcome the blockchain trilemma, which is, how do we have decentralization, security, and scalability? So Ethereum operates at somewhere between 12 and 24 transactions per second on a really good day with a downhill wind.
Right. Which is laughably tiny for even commerce happening in a small city, never mind the globe.
Yeah, I mean, I used to have, well, actually, Consensus in Ireland had a policy of deplatforming me, because I used to always ask their CEO if they were going to put a number recognition plate system up on the ring road around Dublin, because it would eat the entirety of global capacity at 10 to 9 on a Monday morning, right? But look,
making friends everywhere.
Absolutely. So yeah, well, Greg Chew, 2 4-letter words. So I was cursed from the beginning. But anyway, the sorry, I've lost the thread of what I was saying there.
Motorway around Dublin, you got kicked off Consensus.
No, before that, it was
scaling around Ethereum. The number of transactions is too tiny for real applications.
Yeah. So what these guys do is they say, "I'll tell you what, we'll pretend that we're decentralized, and we'll create this very centralized batching process by which we take 8,000 transactions, put them all together, charge you 5 cents for each one of them, and stamp that with Ethereum." It's nonsense. So I called it out on Twitter, on LinkedIn today, and I just said, if you're going to centralize, at least have the decency and honesty to do it well. Go and talk to Google Cloud or Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, and just do it well. Okay, stop the lies, stop it may be good marketing, but it's wholly immoral. So
I thought that was a requirement for good marketing.
Yeah,
that it'd be wholly immoral.
There is that, but there's also
that's our entire marketing plan here at Messy Times. So
yeah, but there's a whole other way of coming at it, and it's okay. So we're kind of meandering a lot here, so I'm my fault, and forgive me, but.
No, but I think your point is, my jocularity aside, the point is, who cares whether it's immoral or amoral? Moral. The fact is, it's dishonest, it's disingenuous. You're not going to deliver to people what they think they're going to get, and that's the main problem with that sort of approach.
I get very angry about this stuff. Actually, you might tell me I'm foolish to do so, and I know intellectually I am, but I do get angry about this stuff, because I see the potential for distributed ledger to create a completely different economy where everybody is rewarded for the value they add, as opposed to the infrastructure that they control
and the rent they see.
And that's the break.
Yep.
Correct. And for me, when I see people, and let's be honest, look at the conversation you and I had as I came into the room to join you. We were talking about lots of other things, but if you boil those things down, we were talking about economic disenfranchisement, and the majority of people are economically disenfranchised.
Radically.
How do we reach out and bring those people back into the economy, restore their faith in the future, and give them back their hope? It isn't welfare checks. It isn't any of these.
It's freedom of title. I mean, the greatest book I ever read was Fernando de Soto's The Mystery of Capital. And he was the first time, for those that aren't familiar with him, that was an example of an academic in Peru who defeated a communist movement, who defeated Shining Path Marxist guerrillas, with the logic of capitalism. And when he and his students went out and did a study in the economy, if you followed the law, they tried to do something great, like set up a sewing repair shop, right? Nothing, not a gun manufacturer, not a distillery, a sewing repair shop in Lima, Peru. If you followed the law about business licensing, real estate transactions, they documented that if you did it legally, it was 14 months and 1,865 separate steps, including bits of paper stamped by some obscure idiot in another, part of the country. And so they actually destroyed communism in their country to an extent by arguing that rule of law, freedom of title, freedom of free markets, freedom of association between people was the solution. And in some, I interject that so vehemently because that is what the original vision for Bitcoin was this exact sort of radical inclusiveness, radically cheapening transaction costs. But I'm stealing your thunder. I'm sorry, go on.
No, you're not. You're saying exactly why this is so important. And it's so important that those of us who understand this and believe in this work together to get this message out, because actually there's a lot of very well-funded operations in the layer 2 space, otherwise known as centralized operations on blockchain, who are destroying that. 2 or 3 days ago, there was a big piece of news celebrated by all the talking heads in crypto that Coinbase have got BlackRock behind them. And my LinkedIn response was, okay, so a completely centralized so-called exchange. So actually, I think I was explaining the difference between single inverted commas and double inverted commas, because single inverted commas, I said, is where there is a phrase that is used by the industry, which I'm going to repeat. Double inverted commas is where I am darkly laughing at the misuse of this term. Exchange and Coinbase do not go together. It is a single-sided market maker, no different from the CFD exchanges of the early 2000s. Okay,
yeah. And for those who don't,
it's not an exchange.
That's a contract for difference, was just a betting parlor where you could take a view on whether a stock was going to go up or down. You got paid out on the difference between your price and the price that happened. Europeans allowed it to happen. The American regulators were like, no way, that's ridiculous. One of the few times I've agreed with them, but go on.
Well, there you go. Your regulator is rather more patrician, and despite the history of America, rather less liberal. But
sometimes it's okay. That is since I agree with them entirely.
Yeah, let's not get into the SEC, because the news yesterday that they're going to come after the crypto community, but actually they're not going after all the people who play the number go up game on social media. No, they're going to go after the exchanges because they might have done some inside trading. Right. Oh, give me a break.
Oh, madness, but anyway, we can touch on Sir Gary's misguided tilting and windmills, but we'll do that another time. I respect and love Gary.
I'm not even sure he's as good as.
They're amazing people. When I look at them, I think they could all be runway models, and they're just doing this as a public service. So I appreciate their willingness to sacrifice their ability to lie on a beach and be served drinks by people who adore them to protect American markets. You hear that, Gary?
Yeah. So trying to join in getting Chris's application for an SEC license top of the pile again.
Top of the pile, exactly.
Yeah. So look, the point I think we're both making is that this is too important to get wrong.
Yes.
And it's too fundamental to transforming our way of life. And sometimes you hear people talk about communism. Well, no one's really given it a try. Okay. And I actually say, you know what? The same is true of capitalism. We've given corporatism a hell of a try. And all it's ended up with is rent-seeking opportunism and the majority of people being economically disenfranchised. That's what DLT can change. DLT is going to be about delivering a common substrate. We call it the Internet of Economics. Yeah. If any of your viewers want to have a look, we actually have a video where we talk about this exact thing on our YouTube page from 21st December last year, a date we specifically chose because it's the winter solstice, and we were telling people this is the end of the darkness. There is light coming.
That's very Northern Hemisphere centric of you.
It is, and yeah.
Go ahead. We'll do it again in June.
We'll let the Southern
We'll
Hemisphere
broadcast
enjoy the
it.
light too.
We'll broadcast in South America and Australia in June. But anyway, go ahead.
Look, actually, I'll be honest about it. Given how often they've won the Rugby World Cup down there, it's just desserts. Anyway.
Oh, is that a shot at the All Blacks? Oh, good Lord.
Well, the All Blacks aren't so hot these days. It's
No.
the Republic of South Africa, my friend. They're doing very bloody well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, all of my South African friends, stop taking the mickey. You will lose eventually. But getting back on message, the point here is, okay, 2017. EOS came to market telling everybody that if you just gave them some money, they'd revolutionize blockchain.
Right.
Now, your viewership, if you're mostly American, you'll never have heard of Father Ted, but it was a comedy show on Channel 4 in the UK about some priest on an island off Ireland.
Mm.
And there was one priest there, Father Dougal, who was literally like the nicest thing that could be said about Father Dougal is that he was a harmless, brain dead individual, right? I mean, he was literally like a goldfish.
Right.
So when I was talking to people in 2017 to come back and do this, I was going to these conferences and people come and say, "Oh, have you heard about EOS?" Yeah. "Oh, you know they're going to revolutionize the blockchain then?" And I said, "Yeah. I've heard that.
I've
But
heard
how?"
that.
And then it was like, yeah, and then it was like the goldfish mentality went, "Ha, have you heard about EOS? Yeah, they're going to revolutionize the blockchain. I know, but I just asked you, how?" And then the response would just be like,
Because they're going to. Haven't you seen the ad? It was amazing.
Yeah, but it was just like, it was a whole series of otherwise, I assume, perfectly rational individual had been lobotomized by this idea. And the idea that I would ask how was just terrible. The point is, what did they deliver? They raised about $8 billion and they delivered something that can do 5,000 transactions per second with enormous centralization in China.
That sounds like a great trade.
Fantastic. So what I wanted to be able to do was to stand in front of people. We talked about marketing at the beginning. I wanted to be able to have the most powerful marketing of all, which is to tell the truth. I wanted to be able to stand up in front of people and say, "Listen, my team and I, we took the hard and high road to get here so that we could deliver a real message of hope. We call the phase we're in, that we're just departing now, we call it marathon. Because the story of marathon that we all know is the message of victory that was delivered, right? And this is what we want to give the world. We want to
And
be
the
able to
messenger died of a heart attack.
Yeah, well, you know what? I came pretty damn close over the last 5 years of pain, suffering, and trying to make ends meet with nothing. Because I couldn't go out to investors and say, "Hey, invest in me. I'm going to change everything. Oh, and by the way, we're going to do this, 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 this." Because when people came out to the barn, we literally did everything in a barn behind Intel in Ireland, and they would say that spending an afternoon with me was like spending a day or a week in a physics lecture, a maths lecture, an economics lecture, a history lecture, and they'd go out boggled. And really, that wasn't helping anybody. What I had to be able to do was get to the point where we understood exactly what it was that was needed, how it was needed, and how we could cadence the delivery.
Yep.
But where I started, going back to the beginning part, was I wanted to say, okay, so if tokens point at assets, they're not assets in of themselves. And the key to DLT is that we can trust the message, not the messenger. Then we've got to start creating a new type of asset that actually contains all of the component parts. There's no custodial layer. So if it were my car, it wouldn't just say, "I'm Greg's car." It would say, "This is Greg's car, this is the model, this is the VIN number, this is the service history, these are all the parts that have been changed, and it's been replaced with parts with these part numbers from these manufacturers. This is the original bill of material, and here's the bill of importation, and here's the government stamp that says that this car exists on this road. Oh, and by the way, it's a programmatic asset, so it will also inform the relevant authorities that the car has been sold by Greg to another person, unidentified, which could be you, Chris. And in order to complete the registration process using a disclosure from your account, you would inform the DVLA in the UK or the Department of Motor Vehicles in the US
And
that
that
I
sort of
am Chris
programmatic
Messina.
activity, for those listeners who have heard the term smart contract, that's what that refers to. That there's going to be some degree of interoperability and automatic processing that used to be done by humans with concepts like escrow. You call and tell me this has happened. I then tell the bank to release the money. We can replace all that programmatically.
Actually, it's deeper than that, because smart contracts can do a lot of things, but fundamentally they can only handle binary outcomes. So it's yes or no, it's naught or one. I refer to smart contracts as being a bit like vending machine contracts. They're not legally binding per se, but the assumption is if I put $1 in and I select Coke, I get a Coke at the bottom, right? Well, maybe these days it's more like $2, but when I was a kid, it was $1.
Right. Give them 2.5 more years, it'll be $1,000. But anyway.
Yeah. But so smart contracts are binary. It's yes or no. And I make the point to people when I'm talking about how do we move from where we are today, where we have contracts that are documents of failure, to having contracts that are actually operative governing code. Can we do that with smart contracts? And I said, well, we can have a stab at it, but no, because let's take a contract with 16 terms and 3 possible outcomes. Well, for starters, that's not fair, because smart contracts can't deal with the variable of maybe. They can do yes or no.
Well, why not?
Yes, the state is true.
Oh, maybe is just is a string of yes nos.
But at some point, you have to come to a yes or a no. And this is the thing, is that if you have 16 terms with 3 possible outcomes, you need 43 million, 3 to the power of 16, possible smart contracts in place. If you were to start saying that we're going to deal with maybe until I get to a yes or no, you're sort of getting into Ricardian contract theory. And the whole thing about Ricardian contract theory, which is the theory that you can follow a logic gate to have smart contracts in place, the guy who came up with it was a zero coupon bond trader. And anybody who comes from financial services would know that the dumbest financial instrument, including cash, in the whole universe is a zero coupon bond. So
maybe this is like Schrodinger's zero coupon bond, then. It doesn't have a state until you look at it.
So yeah, his idea, this Ricardian contract theory, that you could actually just have logic gates until you got to the answer, worked really well with zero coupon bonds. But weirdly enough, once you went beyond zero coupon bonds, you ended up into a mathematical nightmare of possibilities for which you had to code. But anyway, look, by the by, that's
that very quickly, that reminds me, I was talking to a theoretical physicist who does a huge amount of work in very complex defense applications, and we were over a few pints in a rural pub in England, going on and on. I said, look, we're going to create a quantum exchange, and I can't wait to pitch it to the regulators, because the risk is infinite, but it's going to be fine. It's going to be just fine. He's like, I think we should do that. I said, that's because you're an academic. And I would love to bring that to the FCA and be like, the risk, infinite, but it'll be okay. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Well, technically, the risk already is infinite. We're just not aware of it.
He's not aware, exactly. He's not aware of it. Don't tell anybody. The SEC is already listening. It's part of my application.
Well, one of the things I say to people that, I said that I wanted to create these complete assets. That wasn't the whole story. Actually, I taught myself how to build algorithmic trading systems. And I did it because I'm a nerd and I'm a weirdo. But the thing that set me on the pathway of understanding what I needed to know from the market in order to give the answer to what I wanted to do was a book called Against the Gods by Sam Bernstein.
Fantastic.
You know it?
Yeah, all 4 of his books. He's a genius.
Right. So what it made me understand is that if you didn't know the moment, locus, and quantum of risk, you knew nothing. I walked away with this. I took that away from this book, and I thought, this is genius. This now
And
gives
all
me
because of a
key tool
drunk
set.
French gambler named Bachelier.
Well, you're going into the backstory now, but the fundamental piece of it was I then began to look at the rest of the world and say, well, in the financial system as it is, and this is 2004, do we know the moment locus and quantum of risk? And the answer was no. And in 2008, we got to find out just how far off we actually were. So I used to explain to people that if you want to understand the current financial system, think of 100 people playing musical chairs in a dark room. You flick on the lights and you discover that there's only 40 seats and everybody fights to get their bum on a seat.
And they're all members of Congress, and they've been playing with the housing market.
Right. Look, the whole market was this. I mean, I'm condensing the whole world's financial markets into this microcosm of an exaggerated example to make a point. So there are 40 seats, 40 bums hit the seats. 40 choose to merge with the 40 who got seats. You know, Lehman disappeared into all the other banks. And 20 ping off the wall, and society is given the bill. That's what happened in 2008.
Pretty much.
Arguably, I've got the numbers wrong, actually. 40 got seats, 20 merged with the 40 who got seats, and society picked up the bill for the other 40. But the thing of it was, we didn't know the moment, locus, and quantum of risk in the financial system then, and we still don't know it today. This is because of the whole thing of delayed settlement. That's at the root of where this goes wrong, delayed settlement. And yes, all the big institutions go, but we love delayed settlement because it allows us to play games with accountants.
Oh, the VIG.
Yeah. But
if you're lending money for a pizzeria in Brooklyn, that's VIG. You're going to jail. If you're doing it on Broad Street, you're a genius and a tightening. You should be allowed to become Treasury Secretary. But
you know, that's the punchline. You know, because actually, earlier on this call, I said about exchange in reference to these single-sided market makers, right? So why do I say single-sided market makers? Well, the NYSE was formed by a whole bunch of market makers, and what they did was they created a price between them all, right? And that was the actionable price that you hit.
A neutralized market with multiple independent players is the absolute perfect exchange, of course.
Correct. What is Coinbase? What is FTX? All of these things, they're single-sided market makers. You never touch the other person's book. You're touching the market maker's book all day long, and that market maker gets to decide what you see, and there's no competition unless you go to a different exchange.
Yep.
But look, this is the nonsense.
And those are growing pains. In that sense, you know, that doesn't bother me so much because the process I've seen by which multiple prices are aggregated, much similarly to kind of in the equities markets, the national best bid and offer. I mean, I was helping a firm called Digita Gamma that created one of the first tri-party repo businesses for crypto, and also created the first international best bid and offer across all the exchanges. That was just a matter of, you know, collecting their APIs in real time and you know, creating a ladder market. So it was doable. And to me, that sort of stutter steps on creating new exchange markets, that doesn't bother me, right? I'd rather have it evolutionarily happen with losers fall away and winners improve service, even if it's rough and ready, than having someone come in from outside and mandate an outcome. So in and of itself, the process of, you know, the great line from Wall Street, I was asking this kid I had on the show a little while ago, was in his 20s. I said, remember that great line from Wall Street? He just looked at me blankly. I was like, go watch it. But when Gordon Gekko said, a fool and his money were lucky enough to get together in the first place, one of the best lines ever written, right? So, you know, I see all these idiotic things, and I'm like, look, if you are a Hollywood bubblehead and your agent lets you out of control and you go blow 80 grand on a picture of a drunk monkey, that's your problem, right? That's no one else's problem. No one's selling you that drunk monkey, but, you know, guaranteed there was real value here. They claimed there was, but that's marketing. You bought it. You're the idiot that bought it. You should be free to buy it.
So to finish the point about the VIG and exchanges, is that common sense, the common man's vernacular to describe something, is actually the right one. The version that we come up with in financial services and technology to dress that up in a way that sounds like it's not really the VIG that's the wrong version.
Fair enough.
But you're raising an interesting point there about how we mandate the winners and losers, and this is where I do have an issue with the centralization approach,
Yep.
because there's so much money has been pumped into the centralization approach that it's very hard to talk above the noise that they can generate. I mean, look, as punishment for challenging the CEO of Consensus over this thing about scalability of Ethereum, I don't know this for a fact, but I had it told to me that they had a policy of telling anybody who was going to put me on stage, and be wary, Chris, now, because you're going to get deplatformed for this. They would.
I've got a whole
They would
article on
actually.
Brownstone Institute
They
about
would
getting booted off YouTube. So go ahead.
Well, they would withdraw. They would withdraw their sponsorship of that channel, that publication, and as one of the biggest players in the industry, to say, "Hey, we're not going to pay for your subscriptions anymore. We're not going to pay for your
Right.
sponsorship anymore." They had a lot of clout, so all of a sudden, the number of places where people wanted to hear what I had to say went to zero.
Luckily, they have absolutely, much like I think it was Kid Rock who said, I'm uncancelable. Like that group has zero impact on what I do for a living in real world mining. Come at me; it's a talking point. I can't wait to be interviewed about it. Go ahead.
There was a funny side to this. So I was invited to Mexico by this really nice bunch of people who wanted to talk about open banking. And the funny side of it was they obviously hadn't heard what I had to say about open banking until I got there.
That's great.
Because look,
So what's the issue? So this is a really perfect point. So what is the particular thing that QPQ is solving, and why does that pose such an existential threat to, say, that big company that was so angry at what you had to say they made people not
look, we're not an existential threat to any of those people. My issue wasn't with Ethereum per se. It's not at all. I think Ethereum has done a lot of really good things. My issue was with the claims that people were making about what it could do that it just can't do. So, okay, and forgive me, there's so many different threads that we can pull on, and we're just touching.
It's my rough goal on this show to take smart folks and herd intellectual cats into one channel. So let's just focus on what QPQ is doing, and maybe that's the point.
Where do we start?
To describe why this approach is right. When people hear financial inclusiveness, I remember the whole thing about the Grameen Bank was supposed to be this great microloan platform. It turned out to be they fudged their numbers, they lied and all that. But the impetus and the idea that if you are lending, like, most banks can't lend below a certain amount. Their infrastructure just doesn't allow it, right? I can't make an investment. If I'm Goldman Sachs, I can't lend you $9. It's ridiculous. The cost of examining your loan is $50,000, right? If I do it fast. So the idea of microloans, micropayments, a lot of these P2P systems that were set up, I love that idea, right? It's like, great, if I've got $300 and I'm a first world middle class person, and I go onto this platform and some guy makes a compelling case that he could really open his own bicycle repair shop in rural Indonesia with an $80 loan, and he promises to give me 9%. Okay, it's unsecured. Like, there's nothing if he doesn't pay me back, I'm out. But okay, I'll do that. Right? That sort of impetus, I think, is where we can guide the conversation on how QPQ can enable that sort of thing. Is that a fair place to jump off?
Yeah. So look, if you want to look at it in terms of where does everything go, that's what we talk about in internet economics. But really, if we're going to ask the question of where do we start, we have to start here, and it's this. Layer 1 blockchains don't work. They just don't achieve their object aims. There's lots of reasons for different protocols not working as well as they should, but Ethereum has a superb base, solidity, smart contracts. It has all of that buy-in from the community. But if you decide to issue an NFT using Ethereum, as the Bay Area or Bored Ape Yacht Club did, they ended up, I think the people buying those tokens spent $175 million on gas fees with Ethereum, and there were still lots of failed deals.
Because it's a single thread protocol, and that's the major headache with that. And
Right.
there's only one chain, and that is remarkably inefficient. And so the demand on processing power drove the price up. Those are the gas fees.
There you go. So this is, as it stands, if you're trying to deliver something like you are, in using distributed ledger technology, you have a series of bad choices to make. Okay, you can go with Ethereum and get smart contracts, get the Ethereum virtual machine, get Solidity, wonderful. You can go with an EVM compatible, which, as I point out to people, we're old enough to remember when people had turbos in cars and they had ball bearings in them and they were made in Germany. And then when they started introducing the ball bearings made in China, the turbo started to blow up. Same ball bearing, allegedly.
Right.
Compatible, right?
Right. Compatible. Almost same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, it's balsa
thing.
wood, not titanium, but whatever. I mean, it's round.
Yeah, just about. So
close enough.
You can go down one of the EVM compatible roads, and you can get a slightly higher speed of consensus.
Ethereum virtual machine.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not running on hardware; it's running on virtual hardware on other hardware.
Correct. It is a software instance of computational capacity on a cloud infrastructure instance.
And we just lost 38% of my audience. Let's see if we can reel them back in.
Okay, but yeah, basically, you've got this. So the other choices are you can go with things that aren't decentralized at all. Any of the layer twos. These are not centralized. These are the worst of all worlds, because actually they are re-centralizing things, and they're not admitting that you have to trust that they will do what they say they do, and they're not regulated. So nobody's looking over their shoulder and saying, are you actually doing what you said you're going to do? No, you just have to blindly trust. So these are the choices that people have as it stands. So we came along and said, well, actually, you know what? There are really good protocols like Hedera and Algorand for delivering consensus, but they don't have the same ease of use or buy-in as Ethereum. So what we do instead is we reduce them to their component parts, a little bit like Lego. So if I go into the shop and I buy a Lego box, it will be to build a fire station or to build a police station or an apartment building. But what if I want to take the kitchen from the apartment building and put it into the police station and put the fire, what's that thing that they fall down when they get out of bed?
The stripper pole.
The stripper pole. I want to put the stripper pole.
It's all brass. I don't judge.
I want to put the stripper pole into my police station.
Right.
I can't do that, or at least not if I'm going to adhere to the rules of how you build the police station, the apartment block, and the ambulance.
Well, luckily they all click together, so the police station can have a stripper pole.
Correct. So this is exactly what we do: is we say, okay, so let's take the best pieces out of all of the Lego boxes and turn them into interconnectable, interoperable pieces that allow us to deliver the service. So what we've done to begin with, and remember earlier on I said to you that they advertise doing 1 million transactions per second, but we don't think that's quite true. So technically, if I was a good marketing person, because we've networked Algorand and Hedera, I would tell you that we have 1.5 million TPS. But because I'm an honest person, I'll say we have 25,000 TPS. But here's the big thing. Ethereum, on a good day with a downhill wind, gets 24 transactions per second. We're delivering 25,000 transactions per second. Ethereum takes 20 minutes to give you finality on the transaction. That's the settlement. We can do it in less than 5 seconds. We advertise less than 10 to be on the safe side. This is completely transformational, because now, without re-centralizing like a layer 2, we delivered, to begin with, 25,000 transactions per second across the network by using distributed ledger technology to scale distributed ledger technology, interoperability, connecting the pieces in a unique way. This is a real layer zero. And the real beauty from the perspective of somebody building something and trying to bring something to market is actually not only do we take away all the deleterious choices that you had in the past and say, no need for trade-off anymore. Here's a solution that gives you the best of all worlds. Actually, from your client's perspective, your customer's perspective, they don't even need to know that they're dealing in a Web3 universe. When you go onto a website, do you know whether the website is mounted on AWS or Azure? No. Do you care? No. Most people want the convenience of use. The whole rationale for why the likes of Monzo, Revolut, any of the open banking layers exist is because they aggregate convenience, and people, surprise, surprise, are willing to pay for the aggregation of convenience.
They pay with their privacy. They pay with everything. They
overpay
for convenience.
They pay for it.
Maddeningly.
Absolutely.
So how does that, and I've stumbled upon this and I will not let it go. So how does that ability to put the stripper pole from one kit into the other kit, how does, is it they greased? Is that you get down the pole faster? Like what is the mechanism by which you achieve this computational legerdemain, if I may? How do you get there?
So yeah, it's reducing the component parts and saying, okay, so you want to use Ethereum to write the smart contract, to issue the smart contract, that
the Solidity
ERC contract
code base has a lot of logical capabilities that are very powerful and useful.
It's super, right? It's a fantastic piece of kit for that. But that's where it stops, because the consensus that it comes with, as we've established, is slow and expensive. So we say, okay, fine, do that piece here. We'll give you the cloud infrastructure to run that and run that well. But we'll also give you batches of transactions so that the startup package is 50,000 transactions a year. The enterprise package is 10 million transactions per year. And we'll say, okay, so we'll give you this and you just get on with building. So you've got an NFT to do with rare earth metals, right?
Right.
So you issue all of your NFTs using Solidity, using the EVM, but you do it with consensus being pulled in from Algorand or Hedera to say this token was created on this date at this time between these two parties, who was the issuer and the buyer. And that then appears in the ledger exactly the same way.
And that's the piece I think people are going to find most confusing, that you can create the contract and the structure of the NFT, the whatever token, using Solidity, which is the language in which Ethereum is coded. But when it comes to proving that it actually exists and you've transferred it, you can use an entire different proving mechanism. It does not have to be the Ethereum proving mechanism. So you can basically prove that all the transactions done about this thing coded in Solidity, but you can prove that using, say, BSV, or you using some other mechanism that is not Ethereum dependent. Okay. Is that right?
Yeah, so you can go to Algorand, you can go to Hedera, Avalanche will be there later this year, any of these protocols, and say, okay, I want you to attest to the existence of this token. That's basically what it's doing.
Got it.
It's a bit like in the medieval era.
So it's a notary public and a signet, wax, and seal.
Bang! Precisely.
Got it. So, that comes back to now I trust Algorand's signet ring.
Yeah, but you see, Algorand is a public consensus network. So actually, it's not Algorand.
I'm still looking for a decentralized faith in a zero trust environment, and I'm not going to get that in a cost-effective way on a single thread Ethereum chain. I can get it from somewhere else, so I can validate this thing, even though it's coded in Ethereum. I can validate it using a different distributed ledger technology.
Correct.
If I can get that, I think my listeners have gotten that.
Right. And underpinning that is our clever bit. And our clever bit is that we actually came up with something called the atomic swap engine that allows us to do transactions in parallel, not in series.
It's kind of like the flux capacitor. I like that. That's
actually,
really good.
It's a downside simpler because you know what it is? It's Christmas tree lights. So the old Christmas tree lights when I was a kid, Well, and when you were a kid, because you're older
Yep.
than I am, thank
Yep.
God.
If one goes out, you're screwed. And as
That's
an
it.
8-year-old,
Right.
your job is to test every single one
Precisely. Until it goes bang.
until it
Right.
goes back on. Yeah.
So, okay, that's in series. As you say, if one goes out, everything that follows goes out. So if you look at the way that most of these types of systems out there that try and solve these sort of issues, in traditional finance as well as in distributed technology, it's an in-series transaction. It's each one is a point of failure. And if one goes down, it all goes down. It's what's called an American option. But if you operate in parallel, one can go down, but the other 7 transactions can go ahead.
Sure.
The other 7 bolts. So that's exactly what we did. We made everything work in parallel. So there was no, trust me, I promise I'll do this. It's no. The system locks everything and goes, right, that's the combination lock. Now it's this. And that's the key that underpins what we've done with 1DLT. Now, what does that mean? It means for developers, we've given you Ethereum with consensus from high-speed, high-performing public consensus providers that stamp everything. It's also done another thing that we think is, I personally think is brilliant, and I'm allowed to say that because it wasn't my idea. We've killed third-party bridges. So all the hacks you're seeing there was one on the, was it Nomad?
Oh yeah, they just siphoned a chunk of cash
200
out.
million?
Yeah, like
200
8,000
million
accounts.
Oh no, that's a separate one. This was bridges. So the 8,000 accounts is another thing that we'll come to. So bridges, third-party bridges is basically what I call my dollar tolls. Okay, it's where people take real dollars, because disgusting fiat money, real dollars, and they give you my dollar toll dollars. Right?
I've offered everyone
So
that hates their fiat, they can give it to me, and I'll kind of like the sin eater of old. I will take those on for you, and I will cleanse them morally.
Yeah. So what these guys are doing is they're creating these third-party bridges to take you from, let's say, Avalanche to Ethereum, or Ethereum to Solana, for example. And what they do is they have these 2 great big pools at either end, and they say, you deposit your Ethereum here, you buy some my dollars, my dollar toll dollars, and at the other end, we'll give you access to our pool of Solana. Great, says you. Except you're now reduced to this third-party trust yet again, and guess what? They're not regulated, there's no oversight, there's no comeback, you're screwed if anything goes wrong, which is exactly what keeps happening.
But it's run by an obnoxious kid in South Korea that put his business, in North Korea and stole my money, and then, gets served by the SEC and doesn't care. So that's okay.
Well, but the thing for us was, again, go back to the point. The whole thing about the economy that we want to make possible is built upon the idea that we build a substrate that enables us to trust the message, not the messenger. If we're using third-party bridges, we're back to trusting the messenger all over again. We're trusting a third party to deliver a service that we don't really need. So what we did is we said, you know what? We're going to destroy that whole idea. Instead, everybody who has a 1DLT, we're going to give you micro bridges to go from your 1DLT cloud infrastructure into Ethereum, Binance Smart Chain, Algorand, Hedera, Avalanche, and you know what?
The logical question then is, obviously, which you can answer is, then why is someone thereby using this system required to trust 1DLT, which is QPQ's product? No. I can use 1DLT and tell me why I use it, and I don't have to trust it.
You use it because it gives you all of these capacities. You trust it because you run it. We just sell you the infrastructure to do it. We don't tell you what to do with it or how to do it. And I appreciate that's a bit like Smith & Wesson saying, we don't tell you what to shoot with our guns. But no, simple reality.
And that analogy is very timely in American politics. We could go with that. So we're not gonna equate 1DLT to Smith & Wesson.
Yeah, it's timely in lots. It's pretty much always timely in America. But look, by the by, the point is, you run it. It's yours. It's your infrastructure. And the really
I can examine that code all the way down to the root, and I can decide there's nothing in here that I don't know. There's no black box component that I can't probe to make sure it does what it says in the tin.
Ultimately, none of that is even relevant. What it comes down to is this. Are you getting consensus from Algorand? Yes or no? Can you look up your token on the Algorand mirror? Yes or no? And if you can, then you've solved, because now you have your Ethereum EVM, you're running it. It's yours. It's your infrastructure. We are no different in this context from AWS.
Right. Oh,
We're saying, here you go. Okay, so you do whatever you want with it. The code
so I'm
is
controlling it
yours.
versus shoving money over a bridge out of control, where I'm just hoping it gets the other side.
Yeah, it's yours. So
Right.
we just say, okay, so you want to instantiate a bridge from one DLT to Ethereum, knock yourself out, hit that button.
My bridge, I've done it. I control the terms of traffic. Got it.
Correct.
Cool.
And fundamentally, you end up with a network of thousands of bridges. So now you're talking about networks of networks, which we then plumb together. And we say to all the one DLT owners, hey, would you like to connect to all the other one DLT people? Because if you would, that's great. We can do that for you.
And eventually, just to jump ahead, because we're coming near the end of this particular show. This could go on forever, but I think people will eventually serialize us. The end goal of that is to create that next generation, what people are generically calling Web3, but for this instance is to finally enable the ability of radical inclusiveness via micropayments. There's no minimum threshold, right? If I'm going to use Visa, they're going to charge 3%. Well, that's absurd if I'm willing to pay 4 cents for something. So by allowing that new infrastructure to arise, or creating that new infrastructure for people to use, eventually more and more networks like that will arise, where people are actually getting rewarded for the value they contribute versus sitting like a fat toll keeper and just grabbing stuff because you have to come across my bridge. Is that a fair statement of where QPT is aimed?
That's it. And ultimately, I go back to the EOS story. We've patented everything in our system, and we've done that for a really good reason. Because once we've proved that everything I've said is true, I'm then going to turn around and say to everybody, okay, so I don't believe in what happened in 2008. In 2008, we socialized and we crystallized this truth. We socialized the risk and we privatized the profit.
Yep, horribly so.
That's anti-capitalism.
Disaster.
So here's what I'm going to do, because in order for what we're going to build to really take off, no single person can own it or control it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the IP, I'm going to fractionalize it, past, present, and future, and say, we're now selling this to the whole wide world. We're going to socialize the profit and having privatized the risk. Yes, we're going to get a payout, but we're going to get the payout at the very beginning of the hockey curve that this thing goes on, because this is the internet of economics. That's the bottom line. I want to be able to go to people with that total integrity from day one. One DLT solves the blockchain trilemma of how do we get decentralization, scalability, and security. We solve that with one DLT. How do we get past bridges? We solve that with micro bridges, decentralization of bridges. How do we get past people hacking hot wallets? So hot wallets are wallets that are exposed to the network.
Yeah, they're sitting on the network.
Really simple. We move everything to operating in a trusted execution environment on chip. So it's operating in a computational space rather than a storage space. We're doing that in Q1 of next year. And that then takes us into the next layer, which is treasury and custody accounts, where we make every person natural, legal, economically sovereign, with economically sovereign assets that actually move and can be observed to move. And right now we're going through a process with
and critically cannot be controlled the way, for example, Prime Minister Trudeau just froze the banking assets of truckers who refused to bow to his insane will in Canada. So it is literally decentralized. There's no one that can flip a kill switch and close your wallet.
And the bottom line is, there's a lot of people who think that's a bad thing, but let me put another story to you. What regulators do is no different from how destroyers used to escort convoys across the North Atlantic. So they didn't know the submarines were there. They'd be pinging the ocean floor with sonar, but the submarines could hear the sonar. They could observe the convoys. And so they just went down the sides. And when they actually got in and killed a merchant and blew up fuel, weapons, people, soldiers being transported across the North Atlantic to fight. Then the destroyers would turn around and start chasing down where this submarine was, and the next submarine took out the other side of the convoy. And all the destroyers did was chase down the ones that they could get to, the submarines they could get to, right? And sure, they became very effective at it, but ultimately there were still sailors dying on these ships. So our
for those kids listening, we're referring to World War II, so go Google that.
Well, actually, we're talking about Reforger as well, because Reforger, which was the plan to move troops from North America to Europe in the event of a Third World War, was also reliant upon this whole idea of convoys right through to the end of the Cold War. But the transformational piece was magnetic anomaly detection. So this allowed a PC-3 Orion, and actually before that, I think it was a P-47 Lockheed, to fly over the North Atlantic. And the submarine didn't know they were there. There was no sonar ping. They could look down and go, hey, there's this great big tube of steel and titanium.
And they usually don't occur in nature.
Right. So we will fire depth charges or torpedoes at this magnetic anomaly in the ground. So this is the power that actually regulators could get with a system like we're talking about, where we have total certainty of who's operating, that there's a KYC AML boundary you've got to pass through, there's real assets being created, that they're properly registered with the various authorities that enable that thing to exist, like my house, your car, a bond, whatever, all of these things. But the key is actually regulators need to stop thinking about securities and start thinking about this. The digitalization of everything is going to lead to the financialization of many, many things, far more things than make up the securities and exchange market today. And recharacterizing something as being a security just because it's traded on an exchange is a mistake. Because actually, how do we get to
a mistake they are plunging towards? And I think some of them are plunging towards it not out of ill will at all. I think it is as a mistaken understanding of the nature of assets, the nature of value, the nature of money, and the nature of risk. And it really is that old joke about, I got a hammer, everything's a nail. And they're missing the point that the securities laws, especially in the US, that were created for outrages that would just blow people away that were possible today. Painting the tape was the least of their sins, right? They created entirely fraudulent companies. So there were reasons why the act, at least in the US, was put in place for regulatory. And you've got a nice combination of bureaucratic entities metastasize because they are growing organisms and they don't like to hear no. That's a problem. Whether or not this is applicable or not. And those people, I think, who genuinely are tired of getting calls to their great Aunt Tilly who got robbed by buying some NFT. Well, NFT. I understand those honest, what I characterize as honest regulators, are trying to protect people from fraud. The line they're crossing is they're wandering into nanny state territory where the bureaucracy is going to dictate upon what assets one is able to take risk or not, which is not what they should be doing. They should be policing fraud and I found an anomaly, it's a tube, drop a bomb in it. That's different than everything else needs to be examined and innocent institutions need to be put through the ringer on the off chance they might be a steel tube. And that, I think, is a massive problem. But you're hoping that this structure will obviate the erroneous territory they're wandering into by giving a better defined example of what they should be looking at. Is that fair? It's long-winded.
That's a part of it, but you touched upon three pieces there that are all linked. One is that actually most people are not malevolent; they're not bad, and they want to do things for the right reasons. Regulators aren't trying to characterize financialized assets as securities because they're assholes. They're doing it a little bit along the lines of, I have a hammer and there are all these nails that I need to fix. But also because by recharacterizing something that is not a security as a security, it allows them to extend their capacity in that way. And the idea that government is always malevolent when it does this is incorrect, because that assumes a level of competence on the part of the government that history proves it incapable of demonstrating.
Exactly. Incompetence is always a far better explanatory tool than malevolence. It mainly because of human laziness. Not, and that's not even a bad statement. It really is just there's only so much anyone can process at one time. And if you're faced with some glaring new innovation, I've done a lot of innovation in capital markets. And I've always found that when I've spoken with regulators about some of these things, some of the equity market structure, some of the around commodity linked stuff, they're willing to listen. And if they took the time to get through it, out the other end came, yeah, that's really smart. I don't think we need to get involved in that, right? Because but if you are inundated with complaints, right, and you're inundated with people calling and saying this bucket shop called and tried to sell my grandmother this annuity about farmland in Lithuania, right? That's fraud you need to go chase. Whereas if someone calls and says, I've just heard about this, like a really smart new thing about, titanium oxide trading on the blockchain, is that okay? I think they're just drowning in information, and it's just simpler to say no than say yes.
And look, a lot of this went on in the ICO era, and I would characterize it at the time as this. There are only so many competent lawyers in the SEC, and they only have so many hours in any given day to work.
Yep.
So if you put them up against all of the big Wall Street law firms with as many lawyers in every firm as there are in the whole of the SEC, all of them telling the SEC, no, behold, this apple is not an apple. In this specific light, it is, my friend, an orange. Exactly. They're not so stupid they don't know they're being lied to. And their response is not, okay, it's an orange. It's, okay, close the book. It's an orange, get lost.
Right.
And this is the thing that I think the crypto industry failed to understand, is that necessity of dialogue. That's what we've worked on alongside all the research and engineering that we've done for the last 5 years. I've been talking to regulators quietly behind the scenes saying, you know what, you're right. Tokens point at assets, they're not assets. We have to recreate third-party custody if we're going to have assets on a blockchain, unless we actually create these data-rich digital assets that can actually move through the blockchain with the data as observable states. So the way I express it is in simple physics, is if you imagine an atom being the treasury and custody account and the subatomic particles being the assets, they can be observed to move between accounts in the same way that subatomic particles can be observed to move between atoms.
You're getting traction with that very clean analogy. I want to be in the next meeting with that one.
Well, the thing of it is, you're able to express it as, well, there is finality of settlement. There is custody as a demonstrable, provable fact. And the penny is dropping in different places. People from financial services backgrounds, you get them come back to me and they go, I got it. Tokens pointed assets, you're right. And we need to move away and move to a state where we combine all of the pieces together. Yes, fantastic. But look, as I say, I don't think that regulators are the baddies in this story. I think the industry that is trying to pull the wool over their eyes in order to get them to comply with what they're demanding, they're the guys that we should really be talking to as being problematic.
Yeah.
And this was the issue I had with the announcement about the SEC doing a crackdown on crypto, because they were coming after the centralized off-chain exchanges, not the people going on Twitter saying, buy me now, FOMO is out of this world. Look, I don't know, so I can't say definitively that a certain famous person pumped Bitcoin right as he was looking to exit Bitcoin.
No,
I don't know this for a fact.
No,
but, I do
that
know
can't
that
be true. I'm shocked to find out there's pump and dump happening here.
Right. So, but I do know that if he were to do that in regard to the listed company of which he is the CEO, that he would definitely be wearing an orange jumpsuit. So my point is,
the new black.
Why is it okay to do this kind of thing in the cryptoverse, but not okay in the traditional world? Look, these are the kind of things that I think regulators have got to get to grips with. It's not how do we recharacterize financialized assets as securities. Instead, it's about how do we make sure that financialized assets digitalized assets are done so effectively and properly? And how do we ensure that the financialization of that does not lead to market abuse, does not lead, and fundamentally, that's what every regulator is here to do. They're not here to be
Because once we make that
and tell you off.
safe for everyone, that really does become that radical inclusiveness that Hernando de Soto talked about, the idealistic vision that Satoshi had on the original paper. All that stuff leads towards this, and it's very possible. The beautiful part about this quasi nirvana is it's reachable. If we have a set of protocols that enable incredibly low friction in terms of transactionability because of part of what you're doing in terms of breaking up the pieces of validation versus token creation and definition, that's radically empowering. That's a phenomenal opportunity for the globe, and I think we're getting there. Greg, I want to thank you for coming on. We're going to cut it off here. And I know we could go on for quite a bit, and this has been absolutely fascinating. Is there one last word, because we don't necessarily want to leave my listeners with the vision that a grease stripper pole is why the why the internet's going to be better? What will we leave them with aside from brass?
Look, it's just this. Have hope. Don't lose hope. Don't think that this is never going to change, that all we're ever going to get is more snake oil salesmen. There is change coming. There's real change coming. 1DLT is just the beginning. It's not the end. We're not stopping there. It's how we bring that ideal to the world, that you can trust the message, not the messenger. How that transforms everything. How that ends economic disenfranchisement. How that ends the capacity for prejudice. When I was trying to build farming cooperatives in Ghana, I had to go back to the guys in Ghana at one point and explain to them that the second fastest thing in the universe is actually the speed of confirmation of prejudice. But if you can remove all of the tools of prejudice and reduce everything to numbers, then it becomes, well, actually, you empirically have the best service, the best product. And you can begin to audit this in reverse and say, well, why did you choose to go with a lesser product with a lower score than the better product? It's because you went to school with the guy. Well, I'm a shareholder in your company, and I'm not so very happy about this. But look, I digress. And unfortunately, you and I, Chris, I think, could digress into all sorts of foxholes of conversation. But the message I want to give people is that we have adhered to the rules. We have said you can trust the message, not the messenger. We're delivering, finally, the answer to the blockchain dilemma or trilemma. We're giving the capacity to scale. We're starting at 25,000 transactions per second. We're not playing the marketing game of saying it's 2 million transactions a second because we networked two protocols who can claim 1 million transactions per second. We're going off tested numbers. And it's just the beginning, people. Hold the faith. The cavalry are coming.
That is fabulous. I thank you for that. We're going to end it there. And I may replace Messy Times' tagline from enlightenment to trust the message, not the messenger. Because we've been saying constantly, we'll close as we do traditionally. Thank you so much for tuning in. Turn off the mainstream media that are lying to you and tune into Messy Times so you can trust the message, not the messenger. Take care.
God bless.